Rolling Girls. This show may or may not have landed on your radar depending on how much time you spend watching anime and how seriously you may take this hobby. And if that's something which you're still unsure about, then don't worry. I made this super simple chart to help you. As you can see, this is my spot on here. Yeah, never mind about that. As one of the many shows of the winter 2015 season, Rolling Girls is what I'd call a fairly underrated anime, if you'll let me throw that buzzword out there. Coming from Wit Studio, the same team that worked on the ever-popular Hozuki's Cool-Headedness or other less notable shows such as Attack on Titan, Rolling Girls had a lot of competition within its airtime. Whether it was promising new shows, old favorites getting a second season, or pleasant surprises coming out of left field, it was clear that the winter 2015 season was some serious business. I'm sorry, this is all wrong. What's up everybody, how have y'all been? I'm not dead, despite what my upload schedule may try to tell you. Hey there, I'm Zoiney, and in lieu of what many would call the death of my channel, I promise you I've been spending my time responsibly. But hey, enough of that nonsense, let's not get off topic, and instead focus on the matter at hand, whether or not this show is worth my, or for that matter, anybody else's time. So, Motorcycle Girls, the anime, is one of those shows that can be very difficult to share with anybody who hasn't already dived very deep into the medium due to the handful of tropes that the show unfortunately possesses and the general outward appearance of it. I'm sure anybody here who, like myself, has a general interest in Japanese animated productions is familiar with the concept of moe and its prevalence within the industry. The cute and innocent depiction of characters, which has become very common as of late, can frequently turn people away from a show entirely, but even more recently has caused many to accuse these shows of not holding any real substance. And that's not to imply that I dislike these types of character designs. Quite the opposite. I'm oftentimes a fan of what can be summarized as... But even with my light dabbling into the medium, I can already understand the frustration that surrounds these oftentimes lackluster and generally disappointing shows. Which is why I think Rolling Girls, at least initially, came as a bit of a surprise to many people after its first 2 episodes had aired. Juxtaposing vibrant and well-animated action scenes against the slow, more exposition-heavy bits of the story almost made it feel like a roller coaster ride. These high-octane fight segments were tough to look away from with their literal explosions of color thanks to the ever-talented Arifumi Amai, alongside impressive animation and light poking at common tropes within the shonen genre. Whereas the rest of the episode deliberately slowed down the pacing to introduce characters and elements of the world that they're living in a much more mellow and charming manner. It was incredibly entertaining, and in the many times that I've revisited these 2 episodes, I've struggled to find many things to criticize besides maybe a few dabs of bad CG. And then the 3rd episode happened. Nah, I'm just playing around. Now would be the part of the video where I read trivia off of a Wikipedia article to prove that I know something about this show. That's what you do in these videos, right? Anyways, our main cast consists of these 4 lovely ladies right here. First up, we have Nozomi Moritomo, who is basically a female Micah Sarah crossed with Shiro from Fate. Is that weird? Whatever. She also has this massive obsession with her sister, which I promise you is totally platonic. But despite her awkwardness and general inability to do just about anything correctly, she serves as a decent lead to carry the show through the stories that it intends to tell. Plus, I fucking love her voice actress. Next up would be Yukina Kosaka, the token worst girl. I mean, it wouldn't be an anime without one of these. She has a hat. Honestly, there's really not a lot that's worth saying about her, so let's just move on. Ai Hibiki is our tomboy and arguable best girl of the series, and despite fitting into a generally common and unimaginative archetype, I think the character growth that she displays in the overall presentation of it led to some of my favorite moments in the series. And lastly, there's Chaya Misono. I don't want to bully her. But yeah, she's probably the worst offender of the character that's cute for the sake of it that you'll find here. But she does serve to push for more important moments and interactions between our cast that makes it seem as if this is a believable group of friends traveling across the country instead of, well, this shit. I think conveying believable relationships between characters can be a difficult thing to pull off, and for the most part, it was a success here, regardless if the characters themselves weren't the most interesting or engaging. Funnily enough, for a show titled Rolling Girls, motorcycles and general travel antics seem to fall on the back burner as the show takes a much more open meaning as our 4 main characters literally roll between various locations in this alternate version of Japan. I find this a bit odd, considering the amount of motorcycle and general roadway imagery that the promotional materials seem to have, and it almost gives me the impression that this show was marketed as something it wasn't, possibly relying on a gimmick to pull in potential viewers. But for anybody who's watching this video because they're genuinely interested in the show and not because YouTube's subscription box worked for once, I would look to the 3rd and 4th episodes for a more honest and accurate idea of what you'll be getting yourself into. Because when contrasting the 3rd and 4th episodes to the prior 2, the differences are incredibly obvious. Remember that thing I said about watching these episodes for a better understanding of what kind of approach the show will take? Well, I hope you did. It was like a minute ago. I'll keep it short. There's a lot more of this, and a lot less of this from this point on. And if that's a deal breaker for you, then get the fuck out. As sad as it is to say, this is when the weight of potential flaws really seem to overshadow what else is to come. For a lot of people, this may have been a breaking point already, and there's no shame in that. If you're not into it, you're just not into it. But at the same time, I do think despite the issues that this tonal shift causes, the show still has enough character and charm for something worthwhile to be salvaged from the relentless responses and reviews that many people left for it. I suppose now that I've kind of made fun of the plot, I should probably make an effort to explain it for good measure, or something like that. These 4 young girls traverse across Japan, collecting mysterious stones and helping various people and communities along the way. During their travels, they learn about themselves and the people around them as they grow as friends. There's also some bullshit about rockets or something, but that would kinda be a spoiler, and it's ultimately not that relevant in the grand scheme of what Rolling Girls sets out to achieve. But despite this pretty straightforward story, somehow Mr. Yasuyuki Mito managed to make even some of the simplest plot beats much more complex than they ever needed to be. What else has he worked on? Oh, yeah, that makes sense. A good example of this would be the heart-shaped moonlight stones that many characters seek to obtain throughout the course of the show. Initially, they're presented as powerful objects which characters in the show react to in different ways, whether it's making it into jewelry or seen as a bad omen. Regardless, it was pretty interesting, and it was something I really liked about the show. But when the finale rolled around and their ultimate purpose in the story was revealed, it was honestly underwhelming and convoluted to all hell. It seemed like a desperate attempt to make these stones appear as an object that's more important than they actually were. It's a light spoiler to say this, so you've been warned, but the show was never about what the stones actually did. It was about how the many people they encountered along their journey interpreted and reacted to them. It was a simple plot piece that showed us how different these people and their varying perspectives were, and that final development seemed like it really worked against that notion entirely. To me, it showed a lack of confidence in one's own writing, and it ultimately felt, trigger warning, retarded. There's also that sudden switch of our main cast moving into episode 3, which I brought up a little earlier. It shook the show's foundation in a really unnecessary way, and it ultimately lessened my experience as a viewer. I think an incredibly simple solution to this would be reorganizing how and when certain information would be presented to the audience. In fact, it's why I would recommend that many people start off with the 3rd episode, as it sets up our core cast that I mentioned earlier right away, while also alluding to events from episodes 1 and 2, almost in a way that would entice the viewer to continue watching. And sadly, I can't help but feel like in these situations there was little to no consideration for the perspective of the viewer and what they would be thinking at that time. And it's things like these that I'd have to attribute to nothing more than a poor writer at work. But despite the criticisms that I've given to the show so far, I'd ultimately describe Rolling Girls as an experience that I enjoyed more than anything else. Sure, the overarching plot was never anything to gawk at, but the smaller stories encompassed within them were creative in the delivery and enjoyable by the time they came to an end. Nearly every arc in some way or another was its own self-contained coming-of-age story, usually with some sort of clash between new and old ways of thinking. And while they're simple at the core, that didn't prevent them from being satisfying or thought-provoking in the multiple times I've seen them. Subtlety is the name of the game, and each episode is loaded with tons of little details and pieces of foreshadowing that are charming and, more often than not, tie into the theming in which each one of these stories aims to deliver on. The only suggestion that I'd have to give to the unknowing viewer is to watch this show 2 episodes at a time. That way, any details that are still relevant remain fresh in your mind as each subsequent episode wraps the arc up. Did you get all that? I hope so. Sorry, I kind of feel like I'm moving a mile a minute here. You know what? Actually, what?
All right, who's gonna jerk me off?
Jeb is a big fat mess.
Freeze, scumbag!
The music of Rolling Girls is also worth mentioning, as I think it greatly assists the themes that I was previously discussing. Each episode title, and the name of the show itself, is a reference to a song by the Blue Hearts. If you don't know who these guys are, that's fine, but just know that they're a pretty notable and controversial punk rock band from Japan. I'd say the music is the thing that brought the show together more than anything else. Alongside just being a good listen, the choice of punk music in particular really helps to drive home the idea of being a confused youth, and the whole idea of best versus the rest almost seems to mirror that of a band and their fans. I can't help but feel like this was a very deliberate choice, as later episodes go out of their way to make music the anchor to an entire arc. The opening also shows our main cast performing on stage despite the fact that they never actually do this in the show, almost as if it's more of a pipe dream than anything else. And mix that in with things like the show directly referencing the bands such as the Ramones, and I think it's easy to say that the music choice aimed to do more than simply setting a tone. By the end of it all, I think it's more than safe to assume that Rolling Girls isn't a fully realized show. It's a ride with many highs and lows, to the point where a lot of people would be reasonably turned away from it. But despite that, I still found it to be a warm and cozy experience throughout all of its awkwardness. Rolling Girls, with all of its convoluted plot lines and fluctuating cast of side characters considered, is a story about growing up in its purest and most innocent form. And call me a softie, but those kinds of things really appeal to me. I think the thing that made this show stick out in my mind for over an eternity while I worked on this video was its ability to highlight themes of identity and growth in such a vibrant and extravagant manner while still feeling as if it was grounded in some form of reality. Is it perfect or anything substantial within the scope of the medium? No, of course not, but more important than what Rolling Girls isn't is what it is. A simplistic coming-of-age story with an appealing aesthetic that holds the potential to leave a lasting impression for those who may be on the younger side, or just something a bit more laid back and entertaining for the more mature crowd. Is it a show I'd put on my top 10 anime of all time? Probably not, but despite that, I'd still say Rolling Girls is a worthwhile experience by the end of it. And with that, I finally broke my 2-year hiatus, so see you next year!